Members, I apologize for being tardy. We just moved Mr. Smith's bill out.
He's got a good reason.
Committee, so trying to curry favor with the chair. Members, I said it in the House, and I'm going to say it again. I'm not a fan of TIFs. I don't like TIFs, but they are a tool that is in the state toolbox for correcting urban blight and those kinds of things. Now, that said, we have a TIF. That's a fact. Now, how do we engage in an orderly transition out of the TIF? I think I want to go back to a few years ago. I actually argued against everything having to do with RioNuevo. And after I did that, I had a whole bunch of people contact me and say, "What are you doing? We have a blighted city that basically has been mismanaged, that is being run into the ground. RioNuevo in its original manifestation was run by the city of Tucson. But the truth is, it's been run by the state of Arizona's operating outfit now for 8-9 years. And where the city of Tucson blew $250 million with nothing but drawings and plans, we now have buildings that have been pulled out of the ground. We have an entertainment industry now. I will tell you, as late as 2 or 3 years ago, I did not go to downtown Tucson. But I noticed something when the two largest real estate firms in southern Arizona opened an office in the center of downtown Tucson. I also spoke with people who were moving here to work for companies who were looking for homes, and they were looking for homes in the downtown area, within 1.5, 2 miles of the downtown area. Now, as a realtor, that begs the question on my part, okay, this is a pretty serious change in behavior because everybody wanted to live in Oro Valley, Sahuarita, out in the middle of nowhere, Marana, not that Marana's out in the middle of nowhere, but there was a change, if you will, in the attitude of people towards the city of Tucson. So I did a little investigating on my own. I didn't put up with other people's analysis. I went and took a look on my own. So with the inquiries from folks who have decided that they want to live in downtown Tucson, looking at the 1999 versus 2009, the difference, frankly, I see brownfields that now have buildings on them. I see old structures that have been renovated and have restaurants during the day. I mean, they're doing some business. But at night, now I don't want to go downtown Tucson for a different reason. You can't move around. There's so many people. So that's demonstrating a change in TPT tax collection. The other thing that we've got is, besides brownfields having buildings coming up, we got a dump that's been mitigated. Now, people are going to argue back and forth whether or not Caterpillar is coming there because of a gift or because of this reason or that reason. At the end of the day, we've got a dump that was mitigated that is now going to have a productive building on it. That would not have happened under the county of Pima or the city of Tucson. So one of the things that I've tried to do is engineer a way out. Sure, it's going to take some time, but in any business plan, generally, there is an exit strategy. You're not in business forever. And I know that there are several business people on the board here, or on the dais here, that understand that concept. So knowing that, the question became, how do we get this done for the maximum benefit of the taxpayers? Because we still have got the $250 million to retire. I think we're at about $68 million left to pay off. Take about 3 years to do that, and current revenues are on the rise as more and more properties are brought online. It is not my intention to support something that is going to go on in perpetuity. Not at all. In fact, I have urged the RioNuevo board, I don't know if they've taken action on it yet or not, to consider the idea of placing into every single improved lease the option to purchase within 10 years or sooner. I'd prefer 5, but sometimes you can't get bankable documents and you can't get your commercial financing lined up without some level of performance. So the idea is that as improved properties are occupied by other tenants, they build up a clientele, they get to a place where they can own that property. When that property sells and is closed, the proceeds will not go to the general fund. They will go into one of the pensions, probably PSPRS, whichever one needs to have the most assistance, and I think it is PSPRS, most assistance in paying down unfunded mandates. On the other side of the coin, this is one of the amendments, also created the need for the mechanism, if you will, to have any unsold property escheat to the state. Now, there's some questions about whether or not a private enterprise would be able to handle the heavy lift of Tucson Convention Center. It's my understanding that that is now leased out almost every night. It is producing a draw to the city. It is helping to contribute to the overall TPT health, generation health. So then the question becomes, and I understand that there are varying discussions about whether or not the state should have a profit motive in what we do. I would much prefer to see that property sold to a private operator at some point down the road. The disaster that would happen is if this went back to the city of Tucson. That would be a disaster. So whether you agree with the extension or not, at the end of the day, it's a tool that we have available to us. I have tried to work towards a finite timeline to make sure that we unwind this thing, but we do it in an orderly manner so that the state is able to capitalize for the most, at the highest level, for what the taxpayers have put up with. And with that, I'm happy to answer whatever questions you might have.
Questions for the sponsor? Thank you very much, sir. Wishing to speak now, members, we have a number of speakers on this bill, not as many as the last one, so we're going to do 1.5 minutes on each speaker. But speakers, remember, if a member has questions for you, then obviously you can continue with answering. So, who's up first, Mr. Vice Chair?
Roger Score.
Roger Score, come on up.
Not here.
Oh, here we go.
There he is.
Chairman, members of the committee, the Rio Nuevo is really an open wound in Pima County that just oozes dollars. I mean, I always say you see a millionaire drive up here for thousands of dollars. Today you'll see a billionaire drive up here to collect millions. This bill needs to pass to keep you people funded. These are the puppet masters that want this through. This is the biggest fleecing a taxpayer that's ever gone on in this state. Rio Nuevo is a sickening part of Pima County. Actually, a hole should be dug and it should be buried and put away. But it just oozes so much money that you can fleece from taxpayers. You need to support it and pass it and keep the money rolling. I mean, we got people in Pima County that our supervisor makes over $400,000 a year. Pima County supervisor does with all his bennies. I mean, if you go to Pima County, you can get rich off of government real quick. And I suggest if you do want to kill it, you might want to listen to some of the people against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, members? Yeah. Thank you very much. Mr. Vice Chair.
Kevin McCarthy.
Kevin McCarthy, come on up. And on deck, we will do, is it Craig Sundberg? We'll do Craig's on deck. Then after that, we'll do John DiFilippo on deck after that. Mr. McCarthy.
Good afternoon, members. I'm Kevin McCarthy, President of the Arizona Tax Research Association, in opposition. You're all familiar with the negative aspects of pork barrel spending in Washington. Arizona broke into this in the 90s when somebody showed up at the Capitol and said, hey, I want to build a theme park in Gilbert. And since it's not there now, how about you let me keep the sales tax revenue associated with the theme park, and that'll help pay for the infrastructure. We made the argument that to lawmakers, and faced with the same decision you have, if you do this, everybody's going to notice, and cities and developers are going to show up and say, that same deal that you gave to those folks, we'd like it in our city. It passed, it exploded. We had every city and developer with a good idea show up and say, we want the same your sales tax money that you appropriate to schools and prisons, we'd like to keep it for our development. This worked out so poorly that by '99 lawmakers repealed the TIF statutes, but not until they passed one more. And the politics associated with this one was very simple. Tucson needed its
20
turn for a
seconds.
good deal, and we want the Rio Nuevo project passed, and it passed. We urge you to not continue this and not, and as we listen to this argument, if this is a partisan issue of some sorts, maybe there's, the folks live down there notice who does business better, keep Rio Nuevo intact. They do not need the sales tax increment financing beyond 2025. You could keep them, as far as we're concerned, you can keep them in place forever.
Thank you.
But the TIF should stop at 2025.
Questions? Senator Worsley.
Mr. Chairman, and if I could just ask a quick question. I ran the bill to help these guys out a couple years ago. Help us all again understand how much money has been round trip down to the Rio Nuevo so far, and by the 10-year extension, how much more would be sent down to Tucson?
Mr. McCarthy.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Worsley, by our count, it's roughly $150 million that you have pumped into Tucson. By the way, you pumped some $70 million during the depth of the recession when you were cutting schools and everybody else, because this isn't appropriated. You pumped $70 million into Rio Nuevo. By our count, it would have to at least double that from here on out if you run it out to 2020, 35. And I would encourage you, check for a fiscal note, and we'd encourage you to get a deeper understanding of exactly how much money you're indirectly appropriating there if you are to extend it. But again, they have a powerful tool with Jeeplet. I went for the tour. They're right. There's a lot of great things happening down there. By the way, every one of your cities would love to have this same tool. There's nothing unique about this. The Jeeplet tool that they've got, they could continue to keep. They could continue to do the business they're doing. They do not need the sales tax TIF beyond 2025.
Any other questions? So, Mr. McCarthy, I have one. So, what would you recommend then, especially when you heard the sponsor say, City of Tucson hasn't been the best steward for this bill, and so, do you not agree with the assertion that, hey, if we wind it down correctly and actually get the right people to run it, who do you think should have final closure on this, and who should run it then if we don't extend it? Who do you think would be the best entity to do it?
Well, Mr. Chairman, our argument, I'm not going to stand up here and make claims that the City of Tucson's incompetent and that you ought to pass this bill to simply avoid having this go back to them. Point is, if that's a winning argument, then keep Rio Nuevo in place. Keep it in place to 2045. Stop the sales tax TIF, the bleeding associated with this at 2025, what's on the books. The only reason that was extended was because of the massive amount of debt that was outstanding that you all didn't want to pay, and you kept it in place for them to be able to finance the debt service. Why in the world you'd extend it beyond 2025, even if there's a political problem down there? To be honest, keep it in place, but stop the TIF.
Any other questions, members? Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Next up, come on up.
Documents?
Page.
Page.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator Smith, senators. My name is Craig Sumberg. I'm the executive director of the Fox Tucson Theater down in Tucson. I've been there for 8 years. I'm also the chairman of the Merchants Council of the Downtown Tucson Partnership and a member of the executive committee of the partnership. I moved to Tucson 10 years ago from the East Coast. My family and I almost didn't move to Tucson because of the state of the downtown at that point. As you'll see on the Fox Tucson Theater's recently completed economic impact summary sheet, my theater is now generating $6.5 million in revenue downtown Tucson annually, half of which is spent at businesses other than the Fox, including $2 million annually at restaurants and bars in Tucson. The importance of Rio Nuevo's financial support for the restoration of the Fox Theater cannot be underestimated, and we are just one of the many success stories of Rio Nuevo. Other obvious entertainment-oriented Rio Nuevo success stories include the Rialto Theater down the street and the Tucson Convention Center, has been mentioned earlier. It goes without saying that every time someone comes downtown to the Fox or the Rialto or the TCC, they spend money downtown at other restaurants, bars, and businesses. Week in and week out, I probably spend more time in downtown Tucson than anyone else that I can think of, and I can tell you there's widespread support for Rio Nuevo and for extending their charter for another 10 years among all of us who are investing our time, money, and imagination to build a great downtown Tucson. Our downtown has not seen this kind of investment in energy, at least in 2 generations. In Rio Nuevo and the investments they've made in downtown Tucson, have played a central role in that transformation. Their investments have leveraged significantly
That's
more
time.
private investment dollars than the money they are spending. In short, if you walk 2 blocks in any direction downtown, you will see a building being built or renovated. Downtown Tucson is light years ahead of where it was when I moved to Tucson. I look forward to seeing what it looks like 10 years from now.
Very good. Appreciate it. Any questions, members? Thank you very much for coming up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. And Mr. Vice Chair, who's on next?
Fletcher McCusker?
No, I think we're doing Joanne, sorry. Joanne DiFilippo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Dr. Joanne DiFilippo. I serve as Chief Advisor to Pima County Supervisor Allie Miller. However, I come before you today as a taxpayer of Pima County District 3. I speak to you today about HB 2456, the 10-year extension for Rio Nuevo. I urge you to not pass this bill and further ask that you do your homework in researching what is happening with Rio Nuevo today. As an academic professional who has secured over $50 million in federal funding for research and economic development projects, I know what positive outcomes, accountability, and performance measurements are. What happened with Rio Nuevo? Many of the voter-approved projects were abandoned. $250 million was unaccounted for. You've heard this over and over. 2 iterations of the Rio Nuevo board have advanced. But the interesting thing to note here is that while the players' names on the board may have changed, the suits behind those names remain the same today. They don't even hide themselves from public exposure. Many of the most vocal supporters of Rio Nuevo can be found on the project's website under the tab Financial Transactions. It is here where we see the names like Peyton and Associates, a lobbyist receiving $287,000 from 2013 through January 2018, and individuals or corporations who have vested financial interests in Rio Nuevo and Pima County. There is no hard line in the sand separating the crony deals found in Rio Nuevo and local government. Ask yourself, why does Rio Nuevo require a $280,000 lobbyist? That is just one example of the 73 pages of expenses posted on the Rio Nuevo website. I encourage you to go there and take a look at these expenses. Those expenses themselves will help you understand exactly what's going on.
Thank you. Members, questions? Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Members, we have Representative Thorpe and Lawrence that want to speak on this bill, so we're going to do the 2 of them. So Representative Thorpe, and then Lawrence, you'll be on deck, and then we'll go back up to, it looks like we have Mr. McCluster and Supervisor Miller and some others that might be in here. So Representative Thorpe, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. State Representative Bob Thorpe, LD6. With your permission, I'd like to pass these handouts. I'm going to try to be very brief. I'm not going to read the handout. I'd really like to indulge members to take a look at it. So some things that I'm working on right now. I'm trying to replace aging DPS officer housing in remote locations of the state. I'm trying to do that over a 4-year period. Total cost is about $8 million. Rio Nuevo is receiving about $14 million a year. So in other words, with the money that Rio is receiving, we could do it in 1 year and then have about over $5 million, $6 million left over. All of you are going to go back and face your constituents. And things that our constituents are asking for is more money for teachers. I'm very concerned about DPS officers and their pay. They haven't gotten all but just a small amount of pay increases over the years. And yet, if we go ahead with this extension, you know, we're gonna be up over 30 years for Rio, and I can guarantee you it's not going to end at 30 years. This extension will add another $250 million to the amount of taxpayer dollars that goes to this project. Is that my time?
My vice chair would have been proud. You finished in time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, questions for Representative Thorpe?
I have a question.
Yes, Senator Worsley.
Yes. Representative Thorpe, how do you get $250 million with $14 million a year for 10 years?
Representative Thorpe.
Yes, Senator Worsley and Mr. Chair, because what we're talking about is from this day forward, so now we're talking 17 years at roughly
Senator Worsley.
14 million a year plus inflation, of course.
Senator Worsley.
Mr. Chair, that's, it's already a law that it will be in place until 2025. So we're talking about 14 million a year for 10 years.
And Mr. Chair, it's in my discussion right here in my notes. If you take a look at the notes, one of the developers is actually pushing for really extending this out to 2050. Is a document or a statement that they made in a publication.
Well, we can only contemplate the bill in front of us.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for Representative Thorpe? Thank you very much, sir. Representative
Thank you.
Lawrence, come on up, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Madam
Welcome to
Chair,
committee.
Mr. Chair, your bill passed unanimously. I thank you for coming over.
Thank you for having me.
And Senator Borelli, I thank you for coming over. Your bill passed also. There was one vote against it. I apologize. Thank you. Misguided. When you traveled to Tucson, prior to Rio Nuevo, you would take the Ina corridor. The hotels were in the Ina corridor. The restaurants were in the Ina corridor. That is no longer the case. I've been to downtown Tucson. I have seen what has been done. I hear everybody talking about what happened 10 years ago, the millions of dollars that were wasted. Granted, that happened, but that's not happening now. The amount of money compared to the 100 million and more that is coming in based on the construction going on in downtown Tucson, you have to see it to understand it. It is amazing. It is a wonderful project. And I hope that this committee will find, as the House of Representatives found, that it is worthwhile. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you, sir. Any questions for Representative Lawrence? Thank you very much, sir.
Gabby
Mr.
Mercer.
Gabby Mercer, come on up. Welcome to committee.
And then if we
And I
have
think on
Fletcher
deck-
McCusker on deck. Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Gabriela Saucedo Mercer. I am a taxpayer in Pima County. I have been following the Rio Nuevo debacle since 2010. As the citizens of Tucson got together and we knocked down this $300 million building of a hotel, my question is, how can you justify giving Rio Nuevo District another 10 more years so they can spend our taxpayer money at a rate of $12 million a year when they already misspent $230 million and all we have to show for is a hole in the ground? Yes, I understand Rio Nuevo has a new board running the business. You trust the businessmen because they're probably doing a good thing for the community. Really? Please take the time to do your research on some of these esteemed businessmen. If you ask me, all I see going on here is a bunch of cronyism at its best. Just ask me about Caterpillar, for example. Rio Nuevo is spending $50 million. They're borrowing $50 million to give Caterpillar a business opportunity. All of these crony deals include some forms of tax abasements, giveaways, financial deals, all which lead to crony capitalism for the selected few. How will you voting for this bill give you more for 10 more years will benefit the average taxpayer like me and your constituents?
Thank you, Ms. Mercer. Any questions, members?
Ask me about Caterpillar, please.
It doesn't appear so. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Allie Miller.
Supervisor Miller is here. Here she comes. Previous board. Welcome, Supervisor Miller.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Senate Committee. The Rio Nuevo district is a flawed concept that was conceived in the 1990s, and the voters approved this TIF district back in 1999. Tucson Convention Center is identified as the primary component asset of this district to this day. We all know what happened with the Phoenix Convention Center / hotel district, right? They just lost $100 million when they sold it, and they had to give another $100 million in incentives to get the sale through. Yet here we are in Pima County, or excuse me, in the city of Tucson, pursuing that concept. We dodged this bullet years ago when the proposed hotel convention center was killed by the City of Tucson Council. I was there when that happened. I fought very hard to stop all of this corrupt spending. Yes, there will be some shiny buildings. There will be a short-term boost in the economy as construction on these buildings take place. But what happens in the end? What happens when the subsidies are gone? Who's left to pay for it? The taxpayers. We're
20 seconds.
currently in a booming economy. What happens when the economy slows? These types of subsidized deals will hurt the economy in the long run. You need, I can tell you the perception of the majority of taxpayers is that special interests are being enriched at the expense of the public. When a government entity has the power to selectively bestow these handouts to preferred developers, it is immediately corrupted. Once you start the subsidies, it becomes an addiction. I respectfully ask each and every one of you to please, please vote no on continuing this TIF district.
Questions, members? Thank you for your testimony.
Fletcher, McCusker.
Fletcher, come on up, sir. Welcome to committee.
If you could pass these out for me.
Page.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, hello, my name is Fletcher McCusker. I'm the current chairman of the Rio Nuevo District. I serve at the pleasure of your president. I was appointed by the president in July of 2012, and I've been elected as chairman now 3 times by our other appointees. It's important for you to note, I think you know, that since the legislature intervened in our district in 2010, all of us now serve at the pleasure of either the speaker, the president, or the governor. That's an important difference from the Rio Nuevo of 99 to 09. And much of what you've heard today, and many of us are as angry about that 10 years as they are, that waste, corruption, and mismanagement was all prior to legislative intervention. Today, we are a case study of successful legislative oversight. A number of changes were made in the 09-10 legislative session and in subsequent sessions since then to create safeguards so the kind of runaway train that you saw in the first decade
20 seconds.
will not happen again. For any amount over $500,000, we have to notify our appointers at least 2 weeks before we agendize that. We serve at the pleasure. So indeed, if there are issues of cronyism, the president can replace me before I get out of the building. What you have in front of you, because people have raised the issue, is a dollar-for-dollar Excel spreadsheet of every dollar that we've invested, and you'll notice that our cash leverage is now over 11 times. What does that mean? For every dollar we're investing, the private sector is investing 11. We're not spending tax dollars, we're creating tax dollars.
Mr. McCusker, Senator Borelli has a question for you.
Sir, yes, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, sir, before I'm going to ask you to continue on with your thoughts, but who ran this prior to the new board?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Borelli, the original 10 years, the board was appointed by the city. The de facto executive director of Rio Nuevo was, in fact, the city manager. There was no accountability to the legislature for any of those dollars. There was no reporting requirement for any of those dollars back to any committee or member of anyone at the legislature. The story was broken by the Arizona Daily Star in 2009 through a series of Freedom of Information requests that the district had spent $230 million and had not built a thing. The legislature was in session precisely at that moment, and I think you were faced with 2 options, both dilemmas. Terminate the TIF which seemed like maybe a wise thing to do given its corruption and mismanagement. However, as you heard before, the city had also amassed $140 million worth of debt. So had you terminated it, you would have been obliged to pay off the debt. The better thinking, we believe, is proven now, is that you seized control of the district by terminating the city-run board, replacing that with board members who now serve at the pleasure of your leadership. The other thing we've done, which is dramatically different, is every project that we've launched since then, now 20 projects, we have a private sector partner. So it's not about government boondoggles, it's about using TIF dollars to create new TIF dollars.
Any other questions, Senator Borelli? Senator Worsley, have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Fletcher. Fletcher, I think it's instructive to inform us what we have learned. We all agree that the first 10 years of this TIF was an absolute unmitigated disaster. It was a mess. The dollars, as far as we know, were spent on diagrams, pictures, renderings, ideas, and nothing got built, but a lot of consultants made a lot of money looking at possibilities for downtown Tucson. With business people interjected 10 years later and us intervening 10 years later, we've turned this TIF into a profit-centric or a capitalistic type project, using the tax TIF dollars as leverage to bring businesses to downtown Tucson, and we have saved the original vision somewhat from the disaster that started. I believe TIFs are an important tool in the toolbox, but it appears that it could be abused. What have we learned, in your opinion, about how TIF could be used properly? And would you, if you did allow TIFs in the future, what would you do? Would you do a similar governance structure that we have now with your organization? Or what would you do so that it's a tool for the redevelopment of a downtown area or something else that really does benefit from doing the return dollars of a TIF into an area that needs redevelopment?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Worsley, thank you for that question. We've learned a number of things in working with you and other legislative leaders. The most paramount of that is transparency. It's easy to do. We post every check we write to the website. Now, you may not like the way we're spending money, and you heard some people actually suggest that maybe you should go look, but there's no mystery anymore about where the money went. That was a black hole its first 10 years. Literally no one at the city, no one at the state, no one anywhere knew how the money was being spent nor commingled with city funds. Transparency is paramount, very easy to do. Audits are also quite easy to do and should have been done the first 10 years. But in the first 10-year cycle of Rio Nuevo, there was never a single audit. We now do an annual independent audit like any business does. We have a triannual audit performed by the Auditor General's office. So some sort of oversight, we believe, is important. Advance notice to you on a project we're contemplating. The current bill amended provides that we report to the Joint Committee on Capital Expenditures. So there shouldn't be any surprises. Everything that Rio Nuevo did in its first 10 years was a surprise to a lot of people. And then finally, don't allow term limits to the board. So if we truly serve at your pleasure and you're not liking the direction it's going, or we're just fueling our rich friends, fire me. Fire any of us. Replace the board. But it's now a state-run organization. One of the things you'll hear ATRA say is that if you approve this, everyone from Peoria to Sarita is going to line up for a TIF. I don't think so. Why? Because the state controls this district. It's your money. It's state tax money. You appoint the board. We provide oversight to you. I don't know of too many cities that are going to approach you and go, gee, we'd like one of those too. So I think there are safeguards now, Senator, that prevent the kind of runaway train you saw with the district before. The other thing that's clearly evidenced, and we've visited a lot of TIFs around the country, is it's not about the government, it's about the private sector. Sustainability comes from private sector investment, private sector equity, and private commercial lenders. You heard Caterpillar used as an example. Maybe it's a bad example. Caterpillar's building a $50 million building. 43 million of those dollars are theirs. We invested $7 million to produce a $50 million project. And if you look through the list I gave you, you'll see that times 20 other projects. So the TIF should be a partner, or seed money, if you will, for private sector investment.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make my point. We are one of only, there's 45, 46 other states that have TIF laws on the books. This was such a bad start that it gave this tool a bad name. And I think we should learn from this. I think it should be brought back into the state as something legal with transparency, audits, oversight by the legislature, because this is state general fund money, technically. It's coming in through TPT, and we're sending it back to a blighted area to do projects in a downtown. No term limits, fire bad actors that aren't doing a good job, and involve the private sector. Those are the 5 things we've learned about a good TIF, and making all TIFs bad because of what Tucson did for 10 years is not fair. Thank you.
Any other questions, Mr. McCusker? Thank you very much, sir, for your testimony. Thank
Jim
you.
Click.
Mr. Click, welcome to committee, sir.
Members of the committee, my name is Jim Click. I'm a citizen of this state since 1971. I'm a car dealer in Tucson, Arizona. I am a taxpayer. I also collect a lot of taxes on the business that we do. And I'm embarrassed for our city for the 10 years. And I even voted, I couldn't vote for the TIF, I didn't live in the city, but I did support. And I'm embarrassed what happened. I'm pleased that this body, especially this Senate body, appointed this man Fletcher McCusker and Chris Sheaf, who was on the other board. Chris continuously tells me it's great to be on a board, because he was on the first board, and he was ashamed of that, for what they've been able to accomplish since they've been under your control. And I think a lot of you all have been down to Tucson to see what's happened to downtown. We apologize. I apologize. But it happened, and it was under city control. It's not. Now it's under your control. So I have to tell you that I've seen the demise of downtown. When I got there in '71, it was prosperous. Unfortunately, as the businesses moved out to the shopping malls, we lost a lot of that business. I applaud you for what you've done, because now you're going to get more sales tax back for all the stuff that's happened. And I think Senator Worsley has probably looked at some of the numbers. You're going to collect more money. Hope we can spend more money on teachers. Nobody loves this state more than the man you're talking to right here, or nobody loves my community more. I don't have a stake in downtown. I love it. I'm going down there a lot. I invite you to come down and have dinner with me. Thank you.
Very good. Questions, members, for Mr. Click?
I'm pretty good at answering them. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, sir. Is there anybody else, Mr. Vice Chair?
Craig Sumberg.
I think you already spoke.
Joanne
Already spoke.
spoke. That's it.
Very good. Any other discussion, members? Let's move the bill.
Mr. Chair, I move that House Bill 2456 receive a due pass recommendation.
Madam Secretary.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Just a second to explain my vote. So I appreciate everybody, especially who came a far distance today to come down and testify. You know, this bill brings out a lot of people on both sides. It's I think everybody who supports it and opposes it starts at the same beginning, which is it was a kind of a bad idea to start with, bad implementation to start with, and how do you pick up the pieces and move from there? I think it's we're getting to hopefully a solution. For the time now, I'm going to reserve my right to change my vote on the floor, of course, but I'm going to vote no for now and continue to talk with the sponsor and see what we can do in the future. By a vote of 5 ayes, 3 nays, and 0 not voting, you have passed House Bill 2456.